Welcome to The Future is Now, and I am your host, Pastor Christopher Riley. And today we have a special guest with us. But first, I'd like for our co-host to introduce herself to everyone out there in podcast land.
Thank you so much, Pastor Chris. I am Bishop Crystal, Senior Pastor at New Zion Tabernacle, and it is my pleasure to be on the set this afternoon.
And today we are honored to have the pastor of Turner Chapel AME Church, oldest black church in Fort Wayne. Pastor Ken, please greet everyone.
Well, good morning, everybody in podcast land. I like how you said that. Always glad to see my brother and friend of 30 plus years now.
Yes.
And Bishop Bush, or I'd like to say Dr. Bush as well, an educator. So we share similar platforms. Just glad to be here.
Yes, and definitely glad to have you. Looking forward to today's discussion.
And oftentimes we're finding that we have dual roles. In fact, there are few people these days that do just one thing. And so our guest today has just been multifaceted in his career. I have watched him afar as well as up close, and I've always admired how God uses him, not just in the church, but also in the area of education, because this is our educational pillar. So, Pastor Ken, I'm excited to have you with us today. And just tell us a little bit about your journey in ministry as well as in education.
Well, I've reached that point where it seems like it's very short, but it's been kind of long. I'll give you the quick, and I'll just share a couple names. There's a guy named Dr. Henderson Davis, who was at Boston University before Martin Luther King was there, earned his PhD, and said to me one day, asked me about my call. And I said, yeah, I've actually been called. And so he asked me to come and support him. This has been 25 years ago. And then I've also worked with Reverend Dr. Floyd Flake at Wilberforce. So I've always been bivocational, working in higher ed, working in ministry. And it was Reverend Dr. Flake who said to me one day, why are you not pastoring? And I said, because I'm working. And he said, look, if I can pastor a 20,000 member church, give myself to the Congress and work for this nation and do all these different things, then I believe that we need people who have some sense of praxis, who are practitioners, to be able to work in the church and what have you. So I didn't see it at first, but he taught me a couple things. Be true to God, build up the people, educate them, help them, make them self-sufficient, and always build a cadre of people around you
Sure.
that can continue the ministry. So it's non-traditional. And it made a lot of people uncomfortable. But as you said and found out, you can do it. With the help of the Lord, we can do two things at once. And it doesn't make us less effective. And I think the people appreciate the educational piece.
You mentioned about the mentors that you had in your life. And I do believe that our environment and the connections within our environment, especially those human capital connections, can certainly thrust us forward. But you said you didn't see it. And so often, even out in our land today, people don't see their worth. So what are some things that you think we all could do to give people a vision of self-worth, a vision of opportunity and success that oftentimes in just the cadre of what happens in life, they don't see?
Right. Well, I'll make it more local. As you've watched me, I've studied you. And I know about your work in Indianapolis. When I pastored in Indianapolis, your name was very familiar, and I knew your work. I knew the great things you've done. And you offered at one point, with my it's called my ex, but we parent very well, and we get along very well. Offered some mentorship, and I think mentorship is the critical piece. And mentors are not forever. I have two forms of mentoring: passive mentoring, where you see someone that you admire, but you don't admire them for what they are, but how they go about their business, being diligent, being consistent, being professional, using their skills, and so I've always been able to watch you and emulate. That didn't mean we had a conversation every day, but you helped me to know in this space that it's possible to be a professional educator and to continue to work in the ministry. And so maybe we're on two different tracks, and you said environment, But I think all three of us, our
Yes.
opportunities parallel each other. And we're all working in education. We're all doing what God has called us to do. And we may not be like everybody else, but I would say that our contribution is as significant as everyone else who's out here in ministry.
Amen. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Pastor Ken, part of your career path has been in diversity and multiculturalism. You've been able to transition that work to the church. Talk to us about the youth programming that's going on at Turner Chapel.
Well, it's really interesting, and it started what I would call, as we like to say, organically. To use a high educational term, uh, before we get to the youth, before we get to the adults, we use the methodology.
Yes.
And the methodology is this: events are not programs, and programs are not effective or sustainable unless they're measurable.
Amen.
And those programs ought to lead to a relationship.
Yes.
Jesus wasn't about events. He was always doing something in one place
Yes.
to get to another place. And we've kind of become intoxicated off of this big event and that big event, and put it on Facebook and put it everywhere, and then we have an event. But my question has been, as an educator, then what happens afterwards?
That's right.
What is the assessment? What is the outcome? And so it doesn't mean you can't have an event, but that event ought to link to something. So we're working with the Peacekeepers,
Yes.
which is a group of right across the street here with Southside High School. And we're training our seniors on how to engage high schoolers and teens and adolescents. And then twice a week, they go to Southside and they just greet the students, they engage them. But that's a program, and it's sustained. And I could say a lot about it if you ask me some questions, but that's part of the youth development. Then we have the traditional trappings of the church with the YPD and the different, as in other churches, they call it YPWW. But at the end of the day, we want to do something that's sustainable, that's measurable, and has outcome and impact.
You know, you are really preaching my language when you talk about that whole event concept, because I remember gathering our leaders together last October, and we were talking about our young people in our youth department. And I said to them, I said, I don't want an event. I want something that's going to be transformative. I said, there's nothing wrong with events, but what do they do? What happens after the event? And we began to institute some things that really transformed our young people just by using prayer. And I think the knowledge of the word and everything that we do, it's to get us closer and closer to our Creator.
Yes.
And a month ago, we were able, thank God, to baptize 14 people
Wow.
from the age of
Praise the
6
Lord.
to 28.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just by focusing in on their spiritual development and
Right,
discipleship,
right.
which is a major piece of education rather than just the event. Because after the event, didn't we have fun? Didn't we have an emotional high?
Right.
But then there was no follow through, no carryover. So I can really resonate with that. But I also know I want you to talk about this because I think this impacts all of us. What about the men? I've heard awesome things about things that your men are doing. And so what have you done uniquely that would help all of us now just to really minister and teach young men about their future as well?
Well, you know, it's a great question, and I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit fragmented now because what I'm doing is breaking down what has been for all these years and going back and reconstructing it by teaching people without telling them human development theory,
Yes. Okay.
transition theory, using all this. That's in my head, that's in my ability. But getting people to that methodology. We can have events, we can have this. So bringing the men together, getting them to see their own value, getting them to appreciate, and all the things that we do in the church, to forgive themselves.
Yes.
I mean, the Lord forgives us, but sometimes we don't forgive ourselves.
Right.
And we're,
True.
we're stuck in a quandary. How to reconcile with our primary relationships and to overcome those things that have challenged us. So we're bringing them together. And quite honestly, it's been an effort to try to get people together to re-see or reimagine.
Yes.
And so if you're counting numbers, it doesn't always look at it as good as it maybe used to. But when we count impact, I'm seeing people delivered.
Yes.
I'm seeing people. I'm talking about men now,
Yes, yes.
who are dealing with their own challenges and issues. And so when they come back to do what they do or what we do, whether it could be a father-son dinner,
Yes.
it could be cleaning around the church, it could be leading a program, they do it with more vigor and more connection to God. And so human development is the key. And then we put the events back together. We put and tie those events into a programmatic kind of thematic kind of program. But yeah, we're having a really good time with men. And then the last thing is, with this peacekeepers, there's a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational aspect to it, where young men are talking to older men, where white men are talking to black men and Asian men, and it's been fascinating. And fun, but going back to the education piece, it's what we've always done in
Yes.
education.
Yes,
Yes. We in education don't get to predetermine who comes to us. But
No.
when they get to us, when they get in our classroom, when
Yes.
they get in our building, we have to be prepared to serve all regardless.
And you know what? I feel this moment because even as you begin to talk about the men, your whole countenance changed. I don't know if you
Yes.
about your body language. You start smiling,
Yeah,
looking
right.
happy right now. So I can tell that just the genuineness and your passion
Thank you.
for men. And I love what you said too about numbers because they
Yes.
didn't count with Jesus either. He left the 99
That's
to go
right.
get the one, and it really is about
That's right.
digging deep.
That's right.
So yeah, I appreciate that, Pastor.
Pastor Ken,
Yes.
importance of youth and young adults understanding social justice. And I want you to talk about that, but then also segue into your first experiences being exposed to social justice or social injustice.
Yeah, I think it's important with social justice to know your own rights
Yes.
and responsibilities. Free speech. We know we're caught up in a chasm now where a lot of people are talking about black while driving
Yes.
and all these different things. And so not to segment it, but I think we've got to start at home. And I have two young men,
Yes.
and my one son is 14 and the other one's 18. And I love them dearly, but we just recently had to have the talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was stopped by a police officer who asked me, "What did you say something to me?" And so I have some different training. I watched the pivot and we did the things and went through it. And my son was standing next to me. So this is this mentoring piece.
Yeah.
And I told him to stand, and anyway, we go through it. But I think we have to start at home. The Bible's clear about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no sense in ministering to the masses and being great and
Right.
having titles and positions, and home's a mess. So
right.
that's one piece. Educating them, having them read and do those things, and then having them active with me in the church, having them to have those conversations, having them to see their situations at school sometimes that are disparate or less diverse. My kids are at a particular school system that has publicly had a lot of challenges in Southwest Allen. And so even though there are challenges, I'm fully engaged in that work, working with the administration, what have you. So my son came home the other day and said, "Dad, everybody knows you out here." But I recapture that and say, this is social justice.
Yes.
Learning to stand for ourselves. But as much as they stand for themselves, understand that other people are watching how we handle our situations, how we talk to one another. So those are the general things. Having them involved in the community, having them aware of the different things that are going on, and always asking this question: what can you do to impact that? And sometimes you can't go to City Hall. Sometimes you can't go to the big rally, but you can start with prayer at home.
Absolutely.
And ask the
Yes.
Lord to show you ways. How does your vocation
Yeah.
translate into something? And sometimes my sons even say, "Well, I'm not old enough, or what? I don't know." But I say, and you said it as well. What you don't know today, you'll discover tomorrow.
Yes.
As long
Right.
as we put some things my daddy put in me
Yes.
and my father. So when you talk about my Genesis, one of the few times I saw my father cry But the first time I remember was when Martin Luther King died. And he said, "We've lost all hope." And I remember that. I think I was 5 years old. I don't know why I remember it. He said, "We've lost all hope." And I remember him standing at the TV crying, tearful.
Yes.
But then he turned and he said, "But we've not lost our faith." And God is faithful, so we must stand. And so my father took me places. He showed me things, and I was in safe spaces, but I saw violence. I saw the dogs. I remember those. So I'm just old enough to be out of that. And so I may not be able to share with my sons or other young people those images, but social media has helped, and YouTube and all those. But as you just said, they feel my energy. They feel my passion. And that's a form of mentoring. Our kids, and in particular our young men and our young women, need to see us passionate and active about our ministry and not just in the church.
Right.
So social justice isn't always the fight. Sometimes it's the struggle from within to be able to stand for others.
You know, I've seen you and admired you afar in many platforms, especially when it comes to social justice. And when you get the mic, I, for one, tune in. I want to listen. I want to hear.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
But we were in a meeting recently together, and there was a lot of conversation and different viewpoints being expressed. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but when you spoke and you began to articulate your viewpoint and what you were observing in that group structure, I saw the whole tenor of the meeting just begin to change. So when you tell me about your dad and you seen him cry, I think God was just connecting you even at that moment
Yes.
to the struggle, that you are a dominant voice in our community. And when you speak, people do listen. I just want to affirm that. And so tell us now, what are some things that you think we can do as a community? I agree about starting at home, but the home is so fragmented nowadays, and it's different. Now, you describe
It is.
family, the family structure is so different. So what can we do as a community? What can I do? What can Pastor Chris do? What can we do to support that effort of social justice?
Yeah, wow. That was loaded. So let's take a day and work on that one. That was a powerful question. And I feel the same way about both of you. Wow. You know, what can we do? This is going to be, I'm going to give you a difficult answer.
Okay, all right. We're ready for it.
And you heard me the other day, I think, say this. Martin Luther King, I had a guy tell me one time, "You call me doctor." He had a PhD and he wanted to be doctor. And until I tell you what have you, that you can't call me that. And I was like, okay. And, but I reminded him that with King and others, the Reverend came before the doctor.
Right.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. He wasn't happy, but I'm saying that to say this. There are a lot of people walking around with doctorates now. It's been more access, let's call it that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's good.
That's safe.
And education is good.
Yeah.
I know a lot of pastors who are now have doctorates, but they're doing no research. They're doing no phenomenal understanding of why we are. So if you're not doing human development from the pulpit, if you're not seeing how Jesus brought people from where they are to a better place, and then you don't assess that, and you ought to look at the program of worship
Right.
and the program of your preaching. People come to the altar is one thing, but they've got to leave the building and live.
Right.
And what I got tired of was seeing this cycle, the same people coming up. Transition theory says you're either going through something, coming out of something, or about to get into something.
Right.
Yes.
Going through something, coming out of something. And what I found in ministry is a lot of people are going through something, about to get into something, and they can't get out of something.
Right.
And so the social justice in the church is being liberative about the gospel and to make sure that we're assessing the outcomes of our ministry and not just counting how many got saved and how many got baptized,
Yes.
but how many were developed, how many were taken into a greater path. And that's not necessarily a job, but we're trying to get people to heaven.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
And that comes with some basic things that aren't education. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yes.
Treat your
Yes.
fellow man or woman. Do your best. And so, again, I know I keep dialing. I know the social justice piece is in the community, but we've got to start being socially just within ourselves. And I'll say it this way: standards of holiness. How
Yeah.
does God want us to operate? And if we take care of those things, then it makes the world a better place. And then we're able to go out and to deal with the ills of society. And I like what I see happening. We're not as bad as we used to be in a lot of places.
True.
Yes.
But the politics of the day let us know that things aren't any better.
Right.
And
Yes.
the isms are still alive. And so how do we fight? We give voice. We give presence. We give consciousness. But all that should come from God and not from self. And so the justice that I appreciate what you said, I have to wrestle sometimes with. God does give me an energy or profoundness, but I also watch people react and they don't know what to do with it. And we all do it. And it's not me, it's God. But if we learn how to be together and pull together, which was part of that meeting,
Yes.
and
yes.
not be intimidated by one another,
Yes.
and appreciate one another, and build better boundaries that are not denominational, that are not theological, but
Right.
they are more centered around God. God will use us in a socially just way. You can't have one of us in the room and just be doing whatever you're going to do, what you're going to do. 'Cause
That's
even
true.
if we're trying to be cool and political, God's
Right.
going to rise up.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so I answered it in a holistic way, but you have to know your space. You have to know your environment. You have to know where you are and what God wants you to do in that space. And that could be defined in multiple different ways. I'll give you a good one. I sat in multiple rooms and I watched how the brothers don't know what to do with women in ministry. Okay. My grandmother was one of the first women ordained in this country in the original Church of God back in the early 40s. So I've always grown up around women who are preachers. And I don't know where I'd be
Yeah.
had I not had that. Well, the theology, my grandfather was a Baptist deacon.
Oh wow.
All right.
Okay.
And my grandmother sit in the same room and they were split on different things. But you know what? I got the best of both of them.
Yeah.
And so I work to affirm women. I work very hard. And sometimes that doesn't make me popular with the
I am
fellas.
so sure. I am so sure.
But the same thing happened recently when Bishop's talking about me.
Yes.
I was in the room with her when she began to speak.
Absolutely.
And I felt the elevation. And I connected across the room and I said, this is what God is talking about. And I had no idea walking in here today.
Right.
But I've always
wow.
known that if we get in the same space, and we've been in different places,
Yes.
God uses us, and it's like a power
Yeah.
balance
Yes.
of
Yes.
spirit. So I want to, again, affirm you and tell you that you've been powerful, impactful in my life. Even if we don't talk or cross paths
Yes.
often, your spirit is magnanimous. So thank you.
You know, I appreciate that, Pastor. And I remember, certainly being a woman in ministry, there have been challenges. And I just want to share one quick one. When I first started the ministry here, I was in ministry before coming to Fort Wayne, as you know. And so when I came here and God began to deal with my heart about starting a church, I'm thinking, this is the city of churches. We don't need another church. And God said, I need a place I can move. So I said, okay, Lord, you can move through me. So we started the work. And there were all kinds of, I guess, attacks, I could say, but challenges. Let me just say all kinds of challenges. And people wanted me to, go and come here and defend, come here and defend, come here and justify. And so I prayed about all of that because it was just in my ear space almost daily. And I prayed about it. And God said to me, he said, I did not call you to defend you. I called you to defend the gospel.
That's
and when
it.
you do what I've called you to do, then I will build the work. And I have stood on that from the very beginning of time that God has called us for such a time as this, and to make an impact where we can make an impact.
right.
And if we begin to keep the main thing, because it really isn't about us.
That's
And
right.
if we're concerned about people, we're concerned now about their development, about their growth, about their discipleship, about their visions for their future, then it really can't, we're servants.
Yes.
And if we
Say
continue
that.
to
Yeah,
serve,
right.
then that's where greatness comes, because we're committed to the whole service project. And that's what I see in both of you, just that commitment to service. But, as a good teacher, you don't always get the homework at the end of
Yeah,
the
right.
lesson.
Yes.
All right, here come the
So,
outcome.
so I want the homework now.
By the way,
Yes.
social justice just
Yes.
happened. You
That's
just
it.
spoke your social justice.
Praise
Go
God.
right ahead.
Yeah.
What's the assignment now?
Okay, this is the assignment. Okay. Pastor, what book are you reading? What would you recommend for us to read? I'm talking
Yes.
about all of us, because we all want to be better. And yes, we read the Bible, and everything in the Bible is true, but there's so many dynamics that I think make it practical for us. So what book would you recommend for us to read?
Wow, I'm going to give you something that's not. I'm going to give you something that's way off the beaten path. But last week, John Lambert,
Yes.
a pastor in Enemy Church, wrote a book,
Okay.
bivocational.
Okay. All right.
He was
Get that.
very high in the Illinois administrative government.
Okay.
He was a social justice worker, and he just wrote a book called Obamacare Revisited. And if you would think it's about health care,
Right.
the Affordable Care Act, it's about how government systems work to privilege some and ostracise others,
Wow.
and how systems and everything from voting rights to health care to economics, how disenfranchisement is not just something that happens to victims, it's actually a social structure
Yes.
that works to determine
Yeah.
who gets
That's powerful.
and who
Wow.
doesn't. And so in our weekly group that's happening with the Peacemakers at the church, which is a group of about 30 people, meet every Tuesday, every other Tuesday at 10 o'clock. They're black, they're white, they're Asian, they're from all over the place. They're talking about racism. Now we're going to talk about the social structure of racism and bring Dr. Lambert in to talk about why he wrote this book and what he sees from state government, how that plays into federal government, and how we all have to see that our vote matters. But we need to know what we're voting for, not
Yes.
who we're voting
That's
for, but
right.
what we're voting for.
Hello.
So
Amen. I've got
Obamacare
that
Revisited,
Okay.
John
Yes.
Lambert.
All right. Awesome.
And that's my homework. And if you have me back, I'll share some outcomes.
All right. All right. In the 2 minutes that we have left, what's next for Turner Chapel? What's next for Pastor Ken Christmon?
Wow. Well, this year marks 175 years anniversary of Turner Chapel.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And
Wow.
before there were many other churches. And I want to clarify that Turner Chapel, black people could not adjudicate land back in that time.
Right.
And so there was a white woman named Emerine Hamilton who helped take their resources. And when she got downtown, she also put some of her money in. And so that's great diversity movement. And so what's next for me is what is in play, which is to develop people and to make sure that when God calls me home,
Yes.
that what we're doing and what we're working on, that people are in a better state and closer to heaven than where they were. And what I'm finding are a lot of church people who are indoctrinated into doctrine, the traditional things, and having events. But folk need a program to get better, because as Dr. Lambert is saying, these systems are out here to break down our families, to
That's
break
right.
down our children,
Yes,
to break
yes.
down our minds. And if God be for us, he's more than the world against us. But we've got to have some homework done
Yes.
so that learning takes place,
Amen, yes.
that we are the evidence of things not seen. We need to be that. That's who God has called us to be, and that's who the three of us and many who are listening today are.
Right.
We just all need to come together and be ready.
Many people may or may not realize that in addition to being in clergy, in addition to the diversity and multiculturalism work, you've also had a prolific career helping young people or the young at heart with collegiate access. If there's somebody out there in podcast land who's interested in continuing their education, I want you to put on your admissions hat and encourage them.
I can give you the quick and dirty, and that is this. The internet is there. All you have to do is have a desire and a seek, do the research, and put in college, put in your city, put in the major you want. There's a whole bunch of answers out there. Find somebody that can help you, but fill out that form. Nobody goes to college without filling out that application.
That's
So
right.
don't fear, go forward. There are over 3,000 in this country. You may not get into one, but there's a place for you.
Amen.
Amen. Well, we are out of time.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Out of time. But just remember that the future is right now.